It's gonna rain tomorrow. It hasn't rained in like 3 months, so I thought today would be the perfect time to show you all the ponds that we set up this summer and just see how they all did. We'll just have a chill little video where we talk quietly since we're outside and the AC is off, thank God. But yeah, here's the first pond that we set up this season. I think we put this one together towards the end of May. It is now the end of August, and we didn't do a water change to this thing once the entire time. I get that question a lot about these ponds, like how do you treat it? Do you treat it like a normal aquarium? And I don't really, but I kind of do. The water change thing, especially with something like this, isn't super important or necessary just because we have this thing loaded with plants. There's so much biological activity going on in here. There's never any nitrogen in it. So unless something really weird happens, which fortunately it didn't, we don't really need to do anything with the water. And don't get me wrong, I mean, we could go through here and do some siphoning and clear up some of the detritus, but it all just feeds back into this system and it's not a big deal. So here are, of course, all of the golden white cloud minnows that we stocked in it. I can't remember exactly how many we put in here. We have all of these floating plants, but they have been breeding like crazy. That's actually why I have all these floating plants, and we have bowls of it down here. Bunch of babies in this one. Maybe you can see this was kind of like an accidental method for breeding the minnows that I figured out this year, and that's really been the theme of this whole summer, is just fish babies. Like, I don't even know how many we have, hundreds of them. Maybe not quite as much, maybe I'm over exaggerating, but it really does seem like we've had hundreds and hundreds of fish being spawned over here. I'll try and work in maybe some underwater GoPro footage so you guys can see a little bit of more of what's going on in these ponds. I know it's hard, there's so many floating plants. There's a few juvenile minnows down in this pond that grew a decent amount this summer. I mean, I guess they're technically like 4 months old at this point, but they really do eat a lot of their babies, like probably more than 90%, hence why we started doing this method, collecting the Sylvinia at random times when I kind of just felt like there would be eggs scattered onto them, and that method's worked out okay. There's a lot of variability in that, and obviously like you can't time it perfectly because you don't know when there's eggs. Just kind of a weird shotgunning method for trying to get some of these fish. And you know, next year we're gonna raise these up inside. We'll talk about all that stuff here in a little bit, but we'll get them out of the cold here. We don't want to subject these babies to a really cold winter or anything. And actually for the minnows, you know, I don't really know if I want to keep them outside this winter. I've done it before, but you know, you get mixed success with it. The minnows specifically. The rice fish, however, are all gonna live outside. So that being said, here is that first rice fish pond that kind of started it all with the platinum Madakas. It also has just turned into, you know, kind of a crazy mess of plants here, but that was the method that I wanted to go with. I wanted to get the best of both worlds with the breeding, and that's why we have these little tubs down here. So every morning I would come out, I would inspect the females, pull the ones that had eggs on them, put them into here, leave them for a couple hours, come back, and then at that point they've rubbed off all the eggs on the mops. There's none on these right now because they have kind of stopped breeding, but that was the method that I chose this summer, and it worked out pretty good. It got me more engaged with the whole thing, and it was just really fun to like have a little goal for every day, you know, to get more rice fish babies. I don't know, it was fun. This is probably my second favorite pond that we set up. It was the first one that we did with the LEDs around the rim, and of course that little spotlight for the nighttime viewing. It worked out pretty well. I only had to charge this thing up like 1 or 2 times the whole summer, and I think now just at the very end here, the batteries are starting to go dead in this, so it doesn't really light up as bright, but it worked out really well. The plants also did super good in this pond, and this was one of the newer plants that I started this year. So this is an octopus plant. I think it's Pogostemon octopus or something close to that, but this is one of the ones that we got from Corey over at Aquarium Co-op. It did great outside. I was really surprised by that, to be honest. Our Amazon sword here in the middle did okay. It didn't really grow that much. I don't know what the story is with that. It definitely melted off in the beginning, sent off some new shoots in the middle, but then it didn't really do much as far as like getting big and growing up out of the water like I wanted it to, but that's okay. Dwarf Sag also did kind of okay. This was one that was in the shade a lot of the time, and I think it just needed more light. But yeah, this octopus plant, I think it's one of my new favorites. Really good for like filling out a pond or a tank. I'll have links in the description and comments for some of these plants if you guys want to get them, but highly recommend these. These were great this year. This was another one that I didn't really do anything as far as water changes go, except for one time I had this bag of legit fish food up here that I was feeding everything, and I left it unsealed, and then a little wind thing blew through and knocked it into the pond. So we had to end up doing like, you know, a water change and a half to get all the power pack pellets out of this thing. But other than that, pretty much keeping everything just really consistent and letting nature do its thing. This This was definitely my favorite pond this year, and I think you can tell why. Propagated a bunch of the creeping Jenny off of this guy, and then got it hooked up over here with these Potho-Carry clips, just to keep everything nice and tidy, and the root system's like attached more to the side here rather than having it float out in the middle. I thought that would be perfect for the little 2-story pond here to have this hanging vine effect. I just think it looks really cool. So another one where, you know, it's just totally covered on the top. We have the little aquarium lilies. I believe these are just dwarf lilies. And of course the Sylvinia all over the place. This one houses the black midnight Medaka rice fish. I think I actually just saw an egg on a female. That's going to be a thing of the past here pretty soon. Everything did pretty good. This was the one that was in pretty much the diffused light, like almost shade most of the time. Pair that with the fact that we have floating plants covering basically the whole thing is why maybe the baby tears that we put in here, and what else did we put? Also another little cutting of the octopus plant. They didn't really take off, you know, because they weren't getting a ton of light, but again, that's totally fine. The goal for these wasn't to grow a bunch of aquarium plants underwater, it was to make what you could see look as good as possible, and also the rice fish and the breeding. So we had the same little setup where, you know, eventually we ditched the idea of trying to get the Medakas to lay eggs on the mops because there's just so much more competition for those eggs. And we had a little tub down here, same thing, come out in the morning, take the females with the fertilized eggs, put them in their tub, and then rinse and repeat for as many days as possible until baby fish start hatching out. That brings us to the fancy pond. Remember that one? Seems like a long time ago, but this one got a little crazy. I need to get in here and definitely do some winter prep for this one because this pond obviously is going to stay out here. I wish I could say it usually looks better, but this has been a construction zone for basically the whole summer. I mean, we got a duck floating around in here, so it's okay, right? This pond has like 3 goldfish in here. They're super skittish, and I'm probably not going to be able to find them, but I think there's also a guppy in here, and I don't remember how the guppy got in here. We'll try and find him on the underwater cam, but this one just kind of chilled over here. I wasn't really very engaged with it all summer, and I think this is partly why. So at least for me, when the plants start to get crazy and overgrown, and you don't trim them, then it just makes it kind of like nature has taken control and I can't do anything about it. Even though I could, I know it's just me being me, but remember we hooked up a filter here to try and do some aquaponics? Well, that kind of worked. I mean, the kale didn't die. It also didn't really grow. And then our squash or zucchini or whatever we put in here also didn't do well. I think it didn't do well because, I mean, I just didn't set it up properly. Like, this thing was constantly filled with water, and I think there was just too much moisture. I've unplugged it now because I don't think we're gonna run that during the winter time. But yeah, I mean, this was one that just took actually more maintenance. This little solar pump fountain thing also was kind of a bust. Didn't make any content on that, but I'm sure you've seen these things floating around. But yeah, still a cool pond. I mean, it definitely got a little neglected, but that's okay. We'll save it and do something really cool with it next year. And then we have the RGB pond that is no longer RGB'd. This one is home to the koi Medaka rice fish. This was a video that I uploaded like a week ago. I uploaded it on the wrong day that I typically don't, and subsequently it didn't do very well. So I thought, I'll just delete it and then upload it when I usually do kind of almost upload. And then it just did absolutely terrible because YouTube is YouTube. So if this was one that you missed and you're into the pond stuff, definitely go check it out. I'll put a link for it somewhere relatively easy to find, but this one turned out pretty cool. Like I said, we took the RGBs off because they just, I don't know, they weren't as cool as I thought they'd be. We got our potato growing really nicely in this thing, and I decided that we should probably try and do the same thing that we do with the minnows and just take out all the floating plants and see if we can get some babies. And I think we do have like 1 fish that hatched out of here recently. So this method works for rice fish too. There's no plants down in the substrate of this one, but this potato did eventually shoot out a ton of roots. It has a massive root system, and I just started tucking it down into the substrate as it continued to grow. It seemed to be a pretty good method. That way we just get the most amount of swimming room for the fish, and we can actually see stuff when we look down into it. Still doing a bunch of organizing in here because that was a huge project that needed to get done. These doors have made my life a million times easier, and it's way easier to control the climate now. But here's the part you wanted to see. So this is what I've been doing with all the bins of the rice fish, and where I'm gonna grow them up to at least a little bit bigger before we move them into more proper tanks. Once the fries start to hatch in these bins outside, then I would just bring them inside, start over, get a new bin out there, new mops, because even though a few have hatched, there's still more that's gonna hatch on those mops, and the mops kind of provide a little bit of filtration for the water, if you will, kind kind of like a static filter. That's at least what I found out about them this summer. Also threw some Sylvinia from the big tank in here to also help with that and provide a source of food for the tiny baby fish. When these rice fish babies hatch out, they are so small they can't even eat baby brine shrimp. So you need to have a different source of food. I just jumped to the super tiny fry foods because I don't really care what they're eating at that point. I just need to get them to eat. So it's that, and then it's just microorganisms, basically infusoria, not a concentrated amount of it or anything, but just what they can get off of like the roots of the Sylvinia and things like that. A little green water, if it happens to be in the tub, is also really, really good. And then once they get a little bit bigger, as soon as they can accept baby brine shrimp, then I start feeding a little bit of that. That's what these guys are getting. These guys are actually almost big enough to start eating the legit nano exclusively, but unfortunately they're still too small. I have to grind it up with my fingers. That was one of the reasons why I developed the food to be the way that it is, so that you didn't have to do that, but it's not completely meant to be for fry. Larger fry like these fish can get most of it though, but pretty soon they'll be big enough to accept all of it and it'll be all good. And just a heads up, we are starting to get pretty low on the nano, the 2 ounce and the 4 ounce bags. I have to do a reorder of the bags themselves, so we might be out of stock for a little while. So if you need to get some, I'd get some pretty soon. Tried my best to keep as many of the snails out of these tubs as possible, but what I found was that having a bunch of snail waste in a tub doesn't necessarily correlate to it having issues with nitrogen. I guess it makes sense that snail waste is similar to fish waste in that it also doesn't really have that problem because there's not a lot of nitrogen in fish waste to begin with. Everything's color coded down here, so the orange are my fancy koi medacas, the pinks are of course the platinum white ones, and then the dark green or blue or whatever those are the midnight blacks. I need to do a little bit of consolidating here to just free up some more space, but I'm waiting for the super tiny fry to get a little bit bigger, like in this range. We don't want to put super tiny fish in with these guys because I think they might eat them. This whole grow out setup for the rice fish has been super basic. I have to be really careful not to suck up any fish, and I have a method for, you know, making sure that nobody gets thrown out into the yard. You can imagine that if we had even twice this, 3 times 4, I mean, if it was any bigger than this, it would be probably a total nightmare, but this for me is manageable. Decided to just rock the gooseneck lights. We had another one, but we're doing a time lapse that we're using it for. I should just get another one, but this has been kind of an easy solution. I can go through and spotlight different fish, check them out, and we don't have to worry about having a fixture up here stapled with more wires and just a bunch of other stuff plugged in. So this has worked out okay for me. We don't need a ton of light at the end of the day, and I don't know, it just works. I'm kind of getting a little sad though because my females aren't really producing as many eggs as they used to back when it was warmer temperatures and the days were a little bit longer. So it's been very rare that I come out and I see a female with eggs. So the production has really slowed down, and I have what I have. I think I have a decent amount. We definitely had a lot more fry a month or so ago. When you get a bunch of fry hatching out, they're not all gonna survive. So what happens is the fish start to hatch out, we bring it inside, and then you have a ton of fish. I haven't figured out exactly what ratio of them are just not gonna make it due to genetics. So I don't really have an exact count on how many of each variety of fish I have. We won't know probably until they get big enough to where I can start consolidating them into, you know, their for the rest of the year homes. But I think it's still gonna be quite a bit of fish. I mean, it's gonna be enough to really go crazy next spring and summer, and I'm really looking forward to that. I also have some secret eggs on the way from Japan, but I won't spoil that here. Forgive me for the glare on the doors. I haven't gotten the curtains yet, but we did manage to get 3 more albino millennium rainbow fish. They are the ones that are not as brightly colored as the ones that we have had in this tank, but they're getting there. We're up to 6 males, and I think that's probably where I'm gonna stop. The ratio isn't exactly perfect. I mean, I'm not trying to breed them or anything, so I don't think it's that important. I'm just waiting for them to color up like the OGs that are in here. I also gotta figure out something to do with this Siamese algae eater because he is gonna be a monster if he stays in here for too long. But what am I gonna do when fall takes over, it becomes winter, it starts raining, and it gets really cold? Well, with the rice fish ponds, you can leave them outside all winter. I'm fortunate enough to live in a climate that's similar to Japan's in that, yeah, it can get cold to where the top of this water is gonna freeze, but there's no way 10 gallons of water or even 5 gallons of water is going to completely freeze solid. And I can't say they will 100% survive my climate, but just based on Japan and the way that they keep these fish year-round outside, I think it's gonna be okay. These things really are mini koi fish. They are like other goldfish that stay out in that type of a climate where they can survive a freezing top layer. I guess we just don't know until I actually experience it, but I've kept other fish outside in my climate before and have had mixed results. I'm thinking that the rice fish are really gonna thrive though. Well, not thrive in an actual thriving sense, but you know what I mean. Or maybe you don't, so I should probably explain that. See, with the rice fish, from my understanding, is that if you keep them at high temperatures, upper 70s, and you keep them breeding year round, then their life expectancy is gonna go way down. They might only live for like a year. But if you give them more of a natural-esque environment where they're gonna go through many, many months of cold, then it just prolongs their life, and you could have a rice fish that lives for 3-4 years. And that's really my goal here, is to have these fish for as long as possible, not to just breed them until they die. As far as rain goes, that is an issue because I live in a state where it rains most of the time. So you can counteract that by having a little drain hole kind of drilled in the side to where if it gets up to that level, it's gonna spill out, so you don't have to worry about the thing overflowing. Even though if this thing was overflowing, I don't think the fish would just magically swim over the edge. That's definitely never happened to me before in the past, but I guess you never know. But a simple thing that you can do if you live in a state like Minnesota, where a 5-gallon bucket definitely would completely freeze, is just move this thing into the garage. That way you're still getting that kind of hibernative state. Like, obviously the top isn't gonna freeze over in your garage, at least I don't think. You don't have to worry about rain and any other outside issues like that, but your fish can go through more of that like natural cycle. And the same thing goes for like the minnows too. I mean, the more a fish is at higher temperatures and breeding a lot, the less they're gonna have as far as life expectancy goes. So it's up to you with what you wanna do, but that's another thing you can do. Obviously bring this inside if you want, but if you don't have the room for this, which I totally understand if you don't, maybe just throw it in the garage. And I mean, if it gets crazy this winter, like we're gonna have some super long stretches of kind of crazy cold temperatures, I might still do that. I mean, I'm just gonna play it by ear, but I don't think it's gonna be a huge deal if these things, for me at least, stay outside all season. And look, all the people in my comments from Arizona and places where it's crazy hot, you were talking about how you couldn't do this because you thought it would be too hot. I mean, maybe the winter is just your pond season, and so maybe now is the time to start getting ready. That makes me feel less bad for coming out with videos a little late on this, because there are a lot of people that they have a super warm winter. Obviously other parts of the world too, like this might be the start of your pond season, and if that's the case, I'm extremely jealous because I'm gonna miss this. This was a really awesome summer. I just came out every day, got tan, did a bunch of push-ups, bred my rice fish, messed around with all the other things I have going on. It was great. I'm gonna miss it, man, but that's just what makes you look forward to things. So I'll be thinking of that all winter long. And before I sign off here, if you've made it this far, you get a little treat. So this is the pond that I think I'm still gonna set up. It's gonna have 2 glass panels in it, and I think I'm just gonna set this one up to have this inside. So we might put it in the garage, we might actually just keep it in the house, make a cool stand for it. This was one that I had on the list and I just never got to it because I was lazy about getting the glass. Finally did, and then I looked up and it was almost September. But yeah, that's all the ponds that we did this summer. Pond season 11 or whatever it is, I kind of lost track, was a really good one. I had the most fun this year compared to any other pond season. I hope you had a good one too, if summer is your summer, and our summers are the same. Anyway guys, I'm gonna enjoy the rest of the sun because it's about to be gone for a very long time. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. I'm not sure what it's gonna be. I'm so used to doing pond stuff. But yeah, see you guys later.